It doesn't happen during the moment, it happens later, after the conversation ends, after you agreed to something you didn't want, after you laughed when something in you tightened. You're alone again. The room is quiet, and suddenly your body feels heavier than it should. Not tired, not sad, just misaligned. You replay the interaction without choosing to. The words sounded fine, polite, reasonable. Nothing bad happened. And yet something in you knows you weren't fully there. That recognition is subtle, but once it appears, it doesn't leave. Most people live their entire lives pushing that feeling down. They stay busy, productive, distracted. They call the discomfort stress or burnout or overthinking. But deeper than that, there's a quieter truth. You are exhausted from being someone you are no longer aligned with. Not because life is hard, but because you keep betraying small parts of yourself to keep things smooth. This is where the old self begins to crack. Not dramatically, no collapse, no explosion. Just a thin fracture running through your sense of identity. You still show up. You still perform. You still say the right things. But the performance feels heavier now. The mask presses tighter against your face. And the more you maintain it, the more you feel split. One part of you knows exactly what's wrong. The other part keeps pretending nothing is. That inner division is where quiet exhaustion is born. Friedrich Nietzsche noticed something unsettling about human nature. Most people don't live according to what they are. They live according to what once kept them safe. The self you're inhabiting right now was built for survival. It learned when to stay silent, when to agree, when to become agreeable, useful, non-threatening. That version of you worked. It got approval. It avoided conflict. It kept you included. But survival strategies don't expire politely. They linger long after the danger is gone. And what once protected you slowly turns into a cage. At first, the cage feels familiar. Then it feels limiting. Then it starts to suffocate. You notice it when success stops satisfying you, when praise feels hollow, when rest doesn't restore you. You're not burned out because you're doing too much. You're burned out because you're doing too much as someone you've outgrown. If this feels familiar, pause for a moment. Many people listening right now recognize this feeling, but have never named it. Some of them will comment because they've been carrying it quietly for years. The old self doesn't announce its expiration date. It waits until the cost of staying becomes higher than the fear of leaving. And when that balance shifts, life applies pressure. Not loudly, not cruelly, relentlessly. You'll feel it as irritation at things you once tolerated, as resistance to conversations you used to endure, as an urge to pull back from roles that once defined you. You start saying, "I'm fine," less convincingly. You start needing silence more than stimulation. You start questioning why you keep explaining yourself to people who benefit from you staying the same. That questioning is dangerous, not to others, but to the identity you've been maintaining. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Nietzsche understood this fracture well. He saw growth not as improvement, but as destruction of what no longer fits. Not adding layers, removing them, not becoming better, becoming truer, even when truth costs you comfort. This is where most people turn back, not because they lack strength, but because the old self fights to survive. It whispers, "Don't change too much. People will misunderstand you. You're being dramatic. Just push through." And so you do. You keep showing up to places that drain you. You keep playing roles that require you to shrink. You keep choosing familiarity over honesty. And every time you do, the exhaustion deepens because self-betrayal compounds. It doesn't break you all at once. It erodes you quietly. If you're listening closely, you might already know where you've been doing this. A relationship, a role, a version of yourself you keep defending even though it no longer feels real. Some people will feel this sharply enough to comment without planning to. They'll type a word, a sentence, not for attention, but for recognition. The moment you stop defending the old self, something shifts. You begin to notice how much energy it takes to stay the same. You realize how often you say yes to avoid discomfort, how often you explain yourself to preserve harmony, how often you suppress your instincts to remain acceptable. And slowly, a new discomfort replaces the old one. Not the discomfort of conflict, the discomfort of truth. Because once alignment becomes visible, misalignment becomes unbearable. This is where shedding begins. Not as a decision, as a necessity. You don't wake up one day transformed. You wake up one day unable to continue. You start withdrawing your energy from places that don't respect it. You stop laughing at things that don't feel true. You stop volunteering pieces of yourself that were never appreciated. And people notice. They always do. Some will say you've changed. Others will say you're distant. A few will test you, subtly, to see if the old version is still accessible. That's not coincidence. When you stop performing, those who benefited from the performance feel the loss. This is one of the most painful parts of transformation, and one of the least talked about. Growth doesn't just cost comfort, it costs access. And the moment you begin to reclaim your agency, friction appears. If you've experienced this, the quiet resistance from others when you started pulling back, you're not alone. Many people listening are remembering specific faces right now. The old self feels threatened because it knows something you don't yet fully accept. It cannot come with you. You can't carry who you were into who you're becoming. Nietzsche believed that every meaningful transformation requires a kind of inner death, not symbolic, experiential. The death of the identity that kept you safe but small. The death of the version of you that was built for approval instead of truth. And death, even psychological death, creates a void, a silence. That silence is coming next. And it's the part most people aren't prepared for. Because once the old self loosens its grip, you don't immediately become new. You become empty. And that emptiness is where part two begins. Not with clarity, not with rebirth, but with the silence that follows shedding. The in-between space where identity dissolves and the mind desperately tries to rebuild what it just lost. If you've ever reached that stage where nothing fits anymore, but nothing new has arrived, you already know how unsettling it is. That's where we're going next. The silence doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels wrong, like something essential has been removed and not replaced. Like you stepped out of a room and forgot why you went there. You wake up and the old motivations aren't waiting for you anymore. The urgency is gone. The hunger to prove, to impress, to maintain, gone. And instead of relief, there's unease. Because the noise that once distracted you also gave you direction. Now there's space, too much space. This is the part most people mistake for failure. They think something went wrong, that they lost momentum, that they broke themselves trying to change. But what's actually happening is more unsettling. The identity that ran your life has gone quiet. Nietzsche understood this phase as dangerous not because it hurts, but because it tempts you to rebuild too quickly. The mind hates emptiness. It will offer you substitutes, old habits dressed as discipline, old relationships reframed as comfort, old ambitions renamed as purpose, anything to avoid sitting in the unknown. You'll feel the urge to fill the silence, to rush, to define yourself again before the uncertainty exposes you. But if you listen closely, you'll notice something important. Every attempt to return feels wrong. You try to care about what once mattered. You try to revive the old rhythm, and your body resists, not dramatically, just enough to make it clear. This no longer belongs to you. This is where the exhaustion changes shape. Before, you were tired from effort. Now you're tired from not knowing, from waking up without a script, from standing in conversations without a role, from realizing that the identity you leaned on for years is no longer available. This is the void, not emptiness, exposure. You are meeting yourself without armor, without the strategies that once explained who you were. And that is terrifying, because in this space, there's no one to impress, no version to maintain, no familiar way to earn worth, only presence. Many people panic here. They tell themselves they're lost, that they need direction, that they should be doing more. But Nietzsche saw this phase as unavoidable. Before something new can form, the old structure must fully collapse, not partially, not symbolically, completely. That's why the silence feels heavy. It's carrying everything you used to be. You may notice grief surfacing unexpectedly, not just for people, but for versions of yourself. The one who knew what to do, the one who belonged, the one who didn't question every step. You might miss the certainty more than the truth. And that doesn't mean you were wrong to change. It means the old self mattered. It protected you when you needed protection. But protection is not the same as alignment. What once shielded you now dulls you. This is the paradox of growth. You must honor the old self without returning to it. And that requires restraint. In the void, you'll notice something else. Your tolerance drops, not for pain, for falseness. You become less patient with small talk, less willing to explain yourself, less interested in situations that require you to edit your instincts. You might look calm on the outside, but internally, you're renegotiating everything: values, boundaries, attachments. The people around you may feel this before you articulate it. They'll sense distance, they'll ask if something's wrong, and you won't know how to answer, because nothing is wrong and everything has changed. This is where agency begins to return. Not as confidence, as clarity. You start noticing how often you used to override yourself, how many decisions were made to avoid discomfort, how many compromises were made to stay liked. And once you see that pattern, it loses power. You don't need to fight it, you just stop obeying it. This is subtle. You won't announce boundaries. You'll simply stop crossing them. You won't demand respect. You'll stop negotiating your worth. And that quiet shift changes everything. Some people will drift away, not because you rejected them, but because you're no longer available for the role you used to play. This can feel lonely, but loneliness and isolation are not the same. Isolation feels empty. Loneliness feels honest. You are alone because you are no longer lying to stay connected. And that honesty creates space. Space for something new to emerge, slowly. Not as a revelation, as a pattern. You'll begin to notice small preferences resurfacing. Not desires fueled by approval, but inclinations that feel natural. You'll choose rest without guilt, silence without anxiety, distance without justification. You'll stop explaining your evolution to people who only understand your past, not out of arrogance, out of clarity. This is where the new self starts forming, not through action, but through subtraction, less reaction, less performance, less urgency. The ego resists this. It wants markers, achievements, labels. But what's forming now doesn't need proof. It needs patience. Nietzsche believed that real strength emerges when a person no longer needs to be seen, when their sense of self is no longer borrowed from reaction or resistance. You'll feel this shift when fear shows up and doesn't control you. Old anxieties will test you. They'll whisper, "What if you're wrong? What if this leads nowhere? What if you end up alone?" And instead of running, you'll sit with them, not to conquer them, to understand them. And in that understanding, fear loses its grip. Because fear feeds on urgency, and urgency no longer governs you. You'll start trusting timing instead of force. You'll notice that when you stop chasing alignment, it finds you. Opportunities will appear without effort. Connections will feel cleaner. Decisions will require less justification. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped fighting yourself. This is the quiet magnetism most people misunderstand. They think it's confidence or detachment. It's neither. It's internal coherence. When your actions stop contradicting your instincts, your energy settles. And settled energy is powerful. It doesn't ask. It doesn't plead. It doesn't perform. It simply exists, and others feel it. This is why some people react strongly when you change. Your presence reflects their misalignment, not intentionally, inevitably. You won't need to explain this to anyone. You'll just notice that certain dynamics no longer function. Arguments don't escalate. Manipulation doesn't land. Guilt no longer works. Because the hooks that once caught you are gone. You're no longer trying to be understood. You're being accurate. This is not the end of transformation. It's the stabilization. The moment when the silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling spacious. You won't wake up reborn. You'll wake up steady. The chaos will be quieter. Your reactions slower. Your choices cleaner. And one day without ceremony, you'll realize you are no longer fighting yourself. The old self hasn't disappeared. It has softened, integrated, no longer running the show, but acknowledged. And from this place, something becomes clear. Growth was never about becoming someone new. It was about removing what distorted you. The rebirth isn't dramatic, it's subtle. You stop explaining, you stop proving, you stop waiting, you begin moving from sufficiency instead of lack. And that changes how life responds to you. Because when you're no longer chasing identity, you become free to live it. This isn't the final form. There will be more shedding, more silence, more refinement. But now you know the pattern. You know that discomfort doesn't mean regression, that emptiness doesn't mean failure, that silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something real is forming. And if you followed this far, if any part of this mirrored something you've lived, you're already in the process, not behind, not broken, becoming quietly. The shift doesn't announce itself. There's no moment where you stand up and realize this is who I am now. It arrives indirectly. In the way you pause before responding and don't rush to fill the silence. In the way you feel less compelled to correct misunderstandings. In the way you no longer feel the urge to defend choices that finally feel aligned. You notice it first in your body. Your shoulders rest lower. Your breath moves deeper. Your thoughts slow down, not because you're confused, but because they no longer need to race. The urgency is gone, not because you gave up, but because you stopped running from yourself. This is the quiet arrival of the new self, not a replacement, a refinement. Nietzsche understood that what emerges after destruction is not a louder identity, but a self-governing one, a self that no longer needs permission to exist. You begin to feel this sovereignty in small ways. You choose without over-explaining. You walk away without dramatizing. You remain present even when things are uncertain. You don't need to label this change. In fact, labeling it would cheapen it. Because this version of you isn't built on concepts, it's built on congruence. What you think, feel, and do finally start pointing in the same direction. That alignment is rare. And because it's rare, it unsettles people who live in constant contradiction. Some will mistake your calm for indifference. Others will call it arrogance. A few will try to provoke the old reactions just to confirm they still have access. But the hooks don't catch anymore. Not because you hardened, because there's nothing exposed to grab. You're no longer negotiating your worth in real time. That's what peace actually feels like. Not happiness, not excitement, stability, the absence of internal argument. You still feel emotions, fear still visits, doubt still appears, but none of them take control. They knock. You decide whether to open the door. This is the part people rarely talk about. Freedom doesn't feel intoxicating. It feels ordinary. And that ordinariness can feel underwhelming to a mind that was addicted to intensity. For years, chaos gave you a sense of movement. Drama gave you identity. Struggle gave you meaning. Now, without those, life feels quieter, cleaner, and your nervous system takes time to trust that quiet. You may catch yourself waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for the old patterns to return, but they don't, not fully, because something fundamental has changed. You no longer abandon yourself to stay connected. You no longer distort your instincts to remain accepted. You no longer trade truth for belonging. That doesn't mean you isolate. It means you relate differently. Your relationships become fewer, but clearer. Your conversations shorter, but more honest. Your energy less scattered, more contained. You don't give it away so easily now, and you don't apologize for that. This is not selfishness, it's discernment. Nietzsche believed that the strongest form of power is not domination, but self-mastery. And self-mastery doesn't announce itself. It shows in restraint, in silence, in the ability to stand still without needing reassurance. You start trusting your internal timing. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop chasing validation. You stop mistaking motion for progress. And paradoxically, things begin to move. Not because you pushed, but because you stopped resisting alignment. Opportunities arrive without urgency. Decisions feel simpler. Your no becomes as natural as your yes. You realize that clarity is not loud. It doesn't shout instructions. It removes noise. And once the noise is gone, direction becomes obvious. You may look back at the person you were, the one who endured, adapted, survived, and feel something unexpected. Not shame, gratitude. That version carried you through what you couldn't have handled then. It learns strategies you needed at the time. You don't reject it. You integrate it. The difference now is that it no longer drives. It advises quietly, and you choose. This is where the cycle completes. For now. Not with fireworks, with groundedness. You are not finished. You will shed again. You will outgrow again. There will be new discomforts, new silences, new thresholds. But you won't panic next time. Because you recognize the pattern, you know that disorientation is not failure. That emptiness is not regression. That silence is not absence. It's preparation. You know that every time something falls away, it's making room. And that room is not empty. It's fertile. If any part of this mirrored something you've lived, a quiet breaking, a long in-between, a calm that arrived without explanation, others listening are carrying the same recognition. Some will comment because they finally feel seen. Some will stay silent but feel less alone. Both are signs that the work is happening. You don't need to rush what's forming. You don't need to define it. You only need to remain honest enough not to return to what you've outgrown. Because growth was never about becoming someone else. It was about removing what was never you. And once you do, what remains doesn't need to be proven. It simply lives, quietly, steadily, free. If any part of this felt uncomfortably familiar, that's not coincidence. It means you've already begun shedding something that no longer fits. It means you've felt the quiet exhaustion of living out of alignment. It means you've stood in that in-between space where the old self fades and the new one hasn't fully arrived. Most people never name that phase. They assume something is wrong with them, but nothing is wrong. Something is changing. If you've experienced the silence after letting go, if you've felt distance grow where familiarity once lived, if you've noticed yourself becoming calmer, clearer, less available for what drains you, share it. Not to explain yourself, not to justify your growth, just to mark the moment. You can comment a word, a sentence, or simply, "I'm here." Others reading will recognize themselves in it. And if this spoke to a part of you that's still unfolding, stay with the series. Because transformation doesn't end with clarity. It deepens quietly.